係咪都差唔多？OK， 好，唔該晒，係唔該晒，係可以。好，歡迎大家出席。
Welcome to the press conference on private subsidized sale flat pilot scheme. We have Ms. Winnie Ho, Secretary for Housing, Ms. Amy Wong, Permanent Secretary for Housing, and Mr. Donald Deputy Secretary for Housing. There are two parts to the press conference. First, the Secretary will take you through the policy scheme using a PowerPoint, and then the floor will be open to questions. Secretary, please. Good afternoon, members of the media. I'm glad to be here to introduce to you the private subsidized sale flat pilot scheme. We've given it a name in Chinese, Lock in Go, which means let's all join hands to build homes, so there will be a home sweet home for members of the public. Now I'm going to go through a PowerPoint presentation. Now the objective of the pilot scheme is to promote public-private partnership. In the 2022 policy address of the Chief Executive, it's mentioned that there is a need to find ways to boost the housing production. As you know, the various departments and bureaus have been doing much to enhance quantity, speed, efficiency, and quality in terms of public housing production. But for the private housing market, can we do more to help members of the public to buy their own homes in the private market? So that's why we have come up with this proposal to tap into market forces so we could enhance quantity, because we will be making use of private land in the hands of private developers. So that will mean we will have more land resources. And then the pilot scheme will also boost speed, efficiency, and quality. I will be explaining why the speed will be boosted. So there are so the pilot project is to provide more choices to the public in a more efficient manner. There are two approaches. One is public tendering. In from 2023 to 24, we plan to put up 3 government sites for tender. The first site will be put up at the end of 23, the second site in early 24, and then the third site will also be put up later. And the other approach is private land approach. We encourage developers who say possess land or like farmland to apply for rezoning of such sites for developing subsidized sale flats, SSFs. The positioning is clear. This will be private development. So we leverage on the flexibility allowed to developers, and also we leverage on their market sensitivity, so they will produce such units for sale in the market. And then we're going to announce a number of parameters that is a result of us balancing various factors. Now so that's to do with the need to ensure financial viability, and then quality assurance. We need to make sure the units are of a good quality. Now on pricing, I'm sure that's of the greatest interest to you. We require a discount rate, and it's 35% discount of full market price. Land premium, if it's public tendering, then the reserve price, well, because we have required the sale price to be 35% of the full market price. So when it comes to setting the reserve price, there will be this basis too for consideration, that taking into account the 35% discount rate for sale prices. As for the private land approach, if, say, farmland is to be rezoned into residential land, there's a need to pay premiums, and we propose 1/3 of the full market value for the domestic portion. But for the non-domestic portion, the full market premium will have to be paid. We will also impose restrictions on the flat size and number. We want to go by the principle in the 2022 policy address. The saleable area should not be less than 26 square meters, which is about 260 square feet. And there will be a minimum number of flats required. That means we don't want all units to be large units. We make sure there will be a certain number of units of smaller size. And then at the same time, we will require that no less than 70% of the flats must have a saleable area of no less than 34.8 square meters, which is about 375 square feet. And then, of course, there will be some flexibility for developers to consider exactly how the flat size mix. And quality assurance, we need to make sure that the SSFs are of a good quality. We will not buy back unsold flats. So developers have to consider very carefully the products that they try to sell in the market. That means in terms of design and quality, the product must meet the market expectation for them to sell. And then there has to be an additional quality assurance. The developers are required to employ independent checker. That means they are independent of the developers. They can't be associate companies, and that they must conduct testing or inspection and acceptance independently, and then final inspection report must be submitted to us. Eligibility criteria is set at the same level as that for home ownership scheme. So therefore, the eligibility criteria and restrictions such as alienation restrictions will follow that of HOS. For the private land approach, well, of course, developers may have their own considerations as they use a piece of land for the SSF. So maybe they want to provide some units for the elderly, or they want to build units for young families, so they may bear in mind the needs of particular target group, and therefore in the design they may want to include certain features, and they may need to apply for minor modification to the eligibility criteria. They can do so, but subject to my approval. Sales arrangement. Developers have to put up all for sale all flats in one batch within a prescribed time frame.
As for the commercial portion, land premium at full market value will be charged. We have identified 3 sites for tender. Some of the works would have to be performed by the developer, including the site formation and infrastructure works, as well as associated facilities, including certain welfare facilities. Such costs can be deducted from the land premium. Mortgage arrangements. We have heard from developers that they wish to provide special mortgage arrangements for property buyers. Well, these we'll consider, however, we'll have to discuss further with them. The government will also discuss with the Hong Kong Mortgage Corporation Limited on mortgage insurance related arrangements. Now, for the 3 sites to be tendered, we'll first announce 2 sites. As for the 3rd site, because there are technical problems or we are considering other sites, we'll announce the 3rd site in due course. First of all, we expect that at the end of 2023, we'll tender Tung Chung Area 122 site. It is approximately 1.4 hectares. It can provide approximately 1,600 units. The other site is in Chai Wan on Hong Kong Island on Chairman Road. It is approximately 0.5 hectares. It can provide approximately 700 units. There are photos here. For the Tung Chung site, it is a form site. After site formation, it will be available for tender. As said earlier, the anticipated tender date is the end of 2023. For the Chairman Road site, this is an unformed site. There are certain slopes in the surroundings. We wish to tap into market forces for the developers to conduct site formation and piling works, so that we can expedite the progress of construction. We anticipate that it will be available for tender in the first quarter of 2024. This site is quite ideal because it's quite close to an MTR station. So that's it for my presentation. We hope that you can support this scheme to build more flats for citizens. Thank you. Thank you. Now it's the question and answer session. For members of the media who wish to speak, please indicate so. For each member of the media, you can ask 2 questions. Please first mention your organization. Hi, I'm from AM 730. I wish to ask about the details of the application. Now, you said that it is a private development. However, these are HOS flats. So, say for the pilot scheme, if 2 to 3 projects are available for lot drawing with HOS flats for 2-person or 3-person households, they are unlikely to be drawn when it comes to lot drawing. What will you do with them? Also, members of the public are quite concerned about downward trend of property prices. So when private developers are participating in the scheme with the tender arrangements, would the government set a minimum or maximum number of projects per year so as to not affect the property market? Thank you. Well, there are 3 questions. Let's first talk about the number of projects under a pilot scheme. Well, for the sites that we are to provide, will have projections. For the Tongchong site, there will be 1,600 units. For the Taiwan site, it would be 700 units. So we have estimates for these, and we are aware of the timing that these are going to be rolled out. As for the units provided under the private land approach, it would depend on the size of the sites. We accept sites of all sizes, so we welcome developers to discuss with our subject teams on how to implement the scheme. As for when the projects are going to be rolled out, it may be different from HOS flats. These projects will be rolled out as long as they're completed. Well, we would like to thank the Housing Society for helping us with the vetting of applications. The eligibility criteria and alienation restrictions are the same as those for HOS flats. So with the elderly arrangements, they are going to be the same as those for HOS flats. As for the property market part, we see stable property prices. Well, there are multiple factors affecting it. Of course, there's the increase in interest rate, and after the resumption of normal travel, we can see that the market is getting more vibrant than before. We do not see any significant changes, but we'll monitor the situation closely. So when the pilot scheme is rolled out, if the property developers are selling unfinished flats, they will ask for approval for sale prices. Within 1 month, they have to sell the flats in one batch. I believe I've answered your questions. Thank you. Any other questions?
The gentleman over there, please. Good afternoon. I'm from Now TV. Just now there's mention that there will be a 35% discount. Is that sufficient for the public to switch from HOS to this private SSFs? And if the market response is not so good, would you consider talking to the developers to offer more discount? And right now for land premium, again, the concession is 35%, but if no private developers are taking part in the scheme, will you be increasing the discount? Right now, the discount rate is 35%. I'm sure you're familiar with it. For the HOS 2023 Stage 3, the discount rate is 38%. So that is very close to what we're proposing here. There is this difference because we want to encourage private developers to be more creative in terms of the finishing and the facilities in the unit and so on. And you know that HOS flats are always selling well. In 2022, all the flats were sold, and that's an oversubscription rate of 27 times. So that means there are many eligible buyers. And we believe when these projects are launched, they will be very popular among buyers. Of course, we're talking about 35% discount or 1/3 concession for land premium. I'm sure we have struck the right balance, and I believe developers will be interested. But of course, it all depends on the location of the sites that the developers possess, and they have to do their own calculation, of course, but we are confident that there will be interest in this project. The lady over there, I'm from Mingpao. Well, this is a pilot scheme, so how long will it last? Will you be making adjustments each year on the discount rate, for instance? Now, HOS flats are linked to the affordability of the public. So can you explain how you arrive at a 35% discount rate? And in future, how are you going to set the discount rate? The second question is, these are private SSF. So is it public housing or is it private housing? Will it affect the ratio of 70 to 30 for public to private housing supply? And then in previous private participation flats, there were problems with quality, and now you have this independent checker. So sorry, please. That's all for now. That's all. Last question, please. Now for the Taiwan site, the government has planned to build units there. Now you're just giving handing over the site to the private sector. So will there be a delay, because originally completion date is 2031? So will there be delay? And then another question: how is this project different than the land sharing scheme? Well, you've asked 5 questions. Probably you have asked questions for your other colleagues as well. First, for this project, we have 3 sites in the first batch, and then we'll see, or we'll conduct a review on the pilot scheme after we have rolled out the 3 sites. For the third site, probably it will be rolled out put up for sale in 2025. And of course, private developers also own land plots. So we'll see if there's any application for the private land approach, and then we'll see if there's need to adjust the scheme. And now, for the private SSF, it counts towards the 70% of public housing supply. And we've also stressed that there won't be buyback of unsold units. So developers must make sure their units are of a good quality. When they sell the units and when they hand over the units to buyers, the quality will be easily seen. And then we are now requiring checking by independent checker to make sure, say, windows, there's no water seepage, and then all the pipes and in-house services are properly done. And then we want to allow some flexibility for the design. For example, for kitchens or bathrooms, sometimes private developers may come up with some different ideas, offering more choices to the public. So it's a good thing. So that's why we won't go down to such details as the finishes and detailed design. We will leave that to developers. For the Taiwan site, I haven't checked the information whether the projected completion date is 2031. I don't have the information at hand. The journalist said just now that's the information she found. In any case, for most of these projects, they should be completed in 4 to 6 years. If we, introduce this site in 2023, that means it will be completed in about 2028, 29. So that means it will, and then in our projection, there should be a shortening of 2 to 10 months for these projects. Why is that possible? It's because we now leave site formation to developers. The traditional approach is for the CDD to first seek funding from the Legislative Council, and then the Civil Engineering and Development Department will do the site formation before handing over the site to a developer, and the whole process takes time. And also it takes time to invite tenders and then assess the tenders. Now we want to leverage on the flexibility of developers in the private market, so we leave it to private developers to do the site formation. And say for the Taiwan site, maybe there's a slope, so there may be a need for temporary support. And the developers could plan the temporary support well, and they don't need to dismantle the support from one phase to another. So that's why the project will be, the construction will be more efficient. And as for the land sharing project, it's quite different. First, for that project, a flat size won't be too small because there is restriction. I think there are over 1,000 units, so there's need for a large site. And also, the site made available is actually a public housing site. For this pilot scheme, there is more flexibility. As I said just now, some land plots may be small. For example, this Chairman Road site, it will only allow about 700 units, and maybe there are even smaller sites that can produce just 300 to 500 units, and they could be considered too. Of course, we also welcome larger sites coming from the developers. So that's why there is this difference between this project and the land sharing one.
Okay, so first question is, will there be any preliminary estimate on how the scheme will affect the private-public housing ratio, and how fast will that come into effect, given what your estimate will be about the building speed? And the second question is, are there any criteria for assessing the private developers' land to join the scheme if they want to switch the land? Will there be a specific limit, or will there be a ceiling on the supply? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've just answered a similar question to the reporter from Mingbo. The ratio of the private and public, 70% to 30%, didn't change. The land that the 3 pieces of land that we have chosen for the tender come from the public land. So the ratio will remain the same. But of course, if the private developer, they have their own land and they make use of the land to join the program, that will add a little bit more to the 70% ratio. But well, for the time being, we do not see a very, very substantial impact, because you can understand that we are talking about a large quantity of the total volume of public land. And of course, we will welcome warm participation of the private sector to join our scheme. So at the moment, we did not set any limit, and we did not foresee the amount that come out from this scheme will be so great that it will actually affect the overall balance of this 70 and 30% ratio. Thank you.
The gentleman in white. I'm from cable TV. About the 35% discount rate, how did you arrive at that? And then for the Taiwan site, the construction program may be shortened by 2 to 10 months. Now, after you invite tender, will you require the developers to complete the construction by a certain time? If they fail to do that, what would be the consequences? And then initially, you're supposed to announce the scheme in the first quarter of the year. How come you're only announcing it now? First, on the Taiwan side, I said that we will speed things up by 2 to 10 months. I'm talking about the free sites. For one site, perhaps it's quicker, shorter by 2 months. For the Tongchong site, probably, because that's where there's already site formation. The site is from reclamation, so we may be able to compress the construction program because there is no need for site formation. As for other sites, actually, the timetable may be compressed more. As for the completion date restriction, is same for other private land auction. Now, when the land departments prepare the land lease, they will always impose a deadline, and if the deadline is not met, then there will be penalties. I mean the deadline for completion. Now, of course, developers have incentive to speed up the completion of projects so they can sell the units sooner. As for the 35% discount rate, we have considered a basket of factors. Of course, we know the public have certain expectations. We're pitching this project at the HOS level. And the 35% is very close to the 38% discount for 2023 HOS scheme. And of course, we have to consider the source of land supply, and the location of the site, and we have to consider the market price in the surrounding areas. And so we need to strike a balance between public expectation and interest of developers. We believe 35% discount is the right balance.
This lady, please. Secretary, good afternoon. I'm from Singtao. You mentioned earlier that a minimum number of flats would be set. So say for Chai Wan side, there are about 700 units. Would you set a requirement for the developers? Also, you said that developers are flexible in the use of materials, and if such costs are higher, if they are setting higher prices than those of 65%, will people be able to afford that? Also, with the management costs, if they are higher than normal HOS flats, will they be able to afford that? Thank you. Now, for the minimum number of flats, it's different for each site. Your understanding is correct. Well, if for Chai Wan, because they have 700 units, and for the Tongchong site, they will have 1,600 units. So it would depend on the site area. Before the tender exercise, our colleagues will consult various departments on that. Now, for the pilot scheme, each of these sites would be a pilot scheme site. They will have residential units, that is, units to be provided under the pilot scheme. There is the commercial portion, such as the car park or shops, cafes, and so on. These are included in the commercial floor area. Now, the site itself would be classified as a site under the pilot scheme. The private flats will not be included in the sites. They are all subsidized housing units. Now, for each site, they have to think about the visual attractiveness. They also have to think about the costs of materials. They need to find the right materials that are cost effective. So we wish to tap into the private market forces, take advantage of their flexibility and design capabilities. And we hope that such flats will be popular among members of the public. Now, as for valuation, I'll let the permanent secretary talk about that, because we will have an independent surveyor, and the ratings and valuation department will help us with that. Well, with regard to this point, we have set the 35% discount rate. Now, for during pre-sale, for the price list that they're to release, it has to be approved by the secretary. It would depend on the existing market prices. We'll verify such information. We'll ask for the help of the ratings and valuation department to see if it is a reasonable market price. The final decision will be made by the secretary. This is something that we have for existing flats. Now, with regard to the materials, if they use better materials, it would cost more. We will have the developers sell the flats, and we will not buy back any of the unsold flats. They have to consider that the target group is those who are interested in HOS flats. They have to think about whether such property buyers can afford the flats. That's why we wish to offer flexibility to the property developers, because we will not buy back the unsold units. They have to consider the needs of the target groups, and we'll let them make a decision on that. Now, the one wearing a red top. Hi, I'm from Channel C. Well, it was mentioned that private developers are welcome to rezone their farmland. Will you pose any restrictions on the size or impose any form of criteria for private developers to participate in the scheme? Also, you mentioned target groups would include families with elderly members. For example, if there are indigenous inhabitants or civil servants, would you have them in your target groups? Now, the estimates mentioned included farmland because we can see that their private developers have a lot of such land, or if they have identified other suitable land, they can discuss with us, and they can then apply for rezoning. Of course, it was subject to the approval under the town planning ordinance. With the size, we remain flexible. We welcome lots of all sizes. However, they would have to consider the ancillary facilities, the transport network, and factors like such. Well, this is exactly the benefit of this scheme. We can take advantage of undeveloped land potential. As you said earlier, we wish to expand the target groups. We do not wish to say just for civil servants. We wish to include all members of the public. However, for families with elderly or needy members, we do not wish to set too much of a restriction. If you mention indigenous inhabitants, we think it is a small group, and that is not a target group of ours. Thank you. The next question, which should be the last question. I'm from Oriental Daily. You mentioned earlier about zoning. Would you make it easier for private developers to rezone their private land? Also, it was mentioned that there would be penalties if they cannot construct the projects in time. What are the penalties exactly? Would you include such in the land lease? Also, it was mentioned that private developers can obtain land. Would you have any time limit for that they have to submit applications at a certain point in time, or is it that it's going to be on an ongoing basis, and when they cannot sell their flats, they will then apply for such? Also, I want to ask about the ratio of green form and white form schemes. Is it going to follow that for HOS flats that is 60-40? Now, with regard to the market situation, if there are any significant changes, would you consider converting these HOS flats to public rental housing flats? I'll answer the questions in order. As for rezoning, it would have to be the private developer who has to comply with the relevant statutory rezoning procedures. For the completion date and the payment of land premium, it's the same as any sale of land. If they cannot construct the project in time, they would be penalties. Now, for restrictions to be imposed on private developers, I'll perhaps get back to this question at the very end because I don't remember this clearly. For the arrangements in relation to HOS flats, these will be adopted for the units offered under the pilot scheme. If there are any changes in policy, such changes will be applicable to the units under the scheme as well. Now, for the question about market situation, as said earlier, there are no significant changes observed with the property market. We will monitor the situation closely, however. Now, for the third question, well, for the pilot scheme, our expectation is that we will have just a small number of sites for the market to get a hold of the situation, because once the tender exercise is over, it will be a certain period of time before it is done. So we will conduct a review in future. Now, with relation to the tender arrangements, there will be penalties if it exceed the specified time frame. I can't hear you because you are yelling at the same time. Any consequences or any penalties? Perhaps Donald can answer that question. I think the Secretary has answered that question very clearly. It is the same as the arrangements for private land sale. They have to construct the units within a specified time frame. Otherwise, there would be penalties, and such conditions will be specified in the land lease. The speaker did not turn on the mic. I'm sorry, I think that is the last question. If they exceed the specified time frame, there will be fines. Now, as for the quality, as mentioned earlier, we will have an independent checker, and that checker will submit a report. If the quality is not up to par, we will only accept the report once the problems have been rectified. And that's why I think there are very serious consequences, and they have to make sure that this is complied with. I think that is the end. Well, Donald can answer the very last question. But as for the mortgage arrangements, it is a project to be conducted by the private developer, so the mortgage arrangements would be handled by the private developer. However, as mentioned earlier, that the government will discuss with the Mortgage Corporation Limited to see if we can provide a higher percentage of mortgage through mortgage insurance. Well, thank you, everyone. This is the end of the press conference. Thank you. Well, there was another question that I forgot. Well, that is the very last question. Thank you, Joyce. Well, for this pilot scheme, we expect that in the first quarter of this year, we will have a framework. And we have consulted the industry on the framework. After consolidating their views, such as the figure for the discount rate and the 1/3 land premiums, we have derived such figures after obtaining the relevant information, and we now have 2 sites to be tendered. As for the third site, we do wish to select that after careful consideration. Now, however, for the first quarter, we have a framework and we have consulted it with the industry. Thank you, everyone. You can look at the press kit and the press release. Thank you.